Hello and welcome back. This next chapter called Beads is a long one. It's 1,200 and something words. So grab yourself a drink, maybe a nice cup of hot chocolate, coffee, tea, and maybe grab your favorite cat, sit back and enjoy. Okay, so let's see. So last time we were on Speaking Freely, and we met with the Grand Matron, and then afterwards they got flown home, and they started getting ready for meeting the Centaur Council that night. And so they started talking about the beads and everything that it meant to them, and how they told their story through their beads. And then of course Jason starts to get dressed, and so he is wearing a brown shirt, very skimpy brown shorts, and a brown tuxedo, all UPS brown, and thigh-high leather, tan leather boots. No beads. But yeah, so it's been very interesting. So anyway, so I'm going to start off just a little bit from Chapter 30. Okay, I loved the boots. They were soft and supple, and my legs looked so long. Actually, I kind of liked the shorts too. They were dangerously short and made my ass look great. The more I looked at the tuxedo coat, the more it grew on me. NL had mixed different shades in it to give it some texture, as well as adding in some shiny and matte finishes. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. MM went to see how the ladies were doing, and reported back that they weren't ready yet. We decided to wait for them in the living room, where there was more space to get comfortable. And now, Chapter 31, Beads. As we shuffled out of the bedroom, I realized this whole process felt a bit like I was getting married. I was hanging out with my buds, getting all groomed up, and heading towards an important event. That was a little too weird, so I shook my head to clear out the thought. Don't eat too much, CL told me as I fixed another plate to snack on. Don't worry, I told him. I'm always hungry. By the time we get there, I'll be more than ready to chow down, I'm sure. I sat down on our couch, and Bermuda quickly curled up on my lap. He was going to get hair all over my new outfit, but I was glad he was sticking close. So now that we are ready and we have a few minutes, I've been dying to ask, how did we do? Whatever do you mean? Goggles said coyly, but the twinkle in his eye let me know he was ready to spill the beans. You know exactly what I mean, I laughed. How did we do on the odds? How much money did we make? Tell me the tale already. MM and CL looked excited, so the results must have been good. Goggles began pacing as he told the story. It was too exciting, and he had too much energy to stay in one spot. You were getting ready for your big fight, so you had no idea how this affected the Centaur Nation. I don't think I've ever seen news travel so fast before. Our mage was fighting again. He paused and gave me a quick smile. In case you didn't know, we think of you as our mage. I felt my heart glow at that, but I just laughed and waved for him to keep going. We've seen you fight already, and we all knew about the miracle of the shrine and the memorial garden you created. He stopped and shook his head in wonder. Those house mages didn't know what you were capable of. His eyes twinkled proudly. But we did. He clapped a hand to his chest dramatically. Almost every centaur was betting on you before we even knew the details. We're a wagering people anyway, so everyone was excited to support you. Plus, the odds were fantastic. And those odds were, he paused again as he loved to build suspense, 102 to 1. Holy crap, those were some crazy odds. CL and ML nodded vigorously. They already knew where this was headed, but they were obviously excited to relive it again. Goggles waved a hand as if none of that mattered. Of course, that wasn't a sustainable difference. Nobody puts down over 100 pearls to gain one more. The wagers from all the centaurs quickly pushed those odds down to 12 to 1, and that's when the real action started happening. You see, we centaurs don't really have a lot of pearls, not compared to powerful mages. We can only earn what is already in circulation, while they literally have the power to make more money. So when the odds became so favorable, the mages opened up and started betting in earnest. The action opened up even more when the Grand Matron turned the ballroom into an arena, and older mages from all the houses started pouring over to see the fights. The odds quickly jumped to 25-1 as Eugene, the tournament champion, made his way to the ring. It jumped to 37-1 when you were introduced and the announcer mentioned you were only a few weeks old. It bounced all the way up to 49-1 when it was announced you couldn't even manifest a weapon. Betting would have stalled out, except almost every centaur I knew went back and made second, third, and even fourth bets. Your fight shattered the record of the most pearls ever wagered at one time through our system. The Centaur Nation was convinced you could win, and the mages were sure you would lose. No one should have bet against you with odds that skewed, but everybody got caught up in the moment. So the final odds, he paused again, and I realized I was leaning forward in anticipation. 55-1. He did a happy dance while MM and CL joined in. I laughed in joy, but then I had to lean back and quiet down a bit as I received an aggravated look from Bermuda. He wanted a quiet lap moment, and I was being all loud and excited. "Sorry, baby," I told him as I stroked his fur, and he soon closed his eyes in contentment. "Okay then," I said softly. "I know I had a little over 5,000 pearls to wager, and I know there are taxes and bank fees and all that sort of stuff. So how much should I actually keep at the end of the day?" "The final amount you ended up with was 120,073 pearls. Goggles kept his voice down as Bermuda had glared at him too, but he was still ecstatic. "Wow. Just wow. I'd started out with nothing, and now I had a crap ton of pearls. I could even buy one of those charms from the fancy shops if I wanted." I looked at MM and CL. "You all got in on this too, right?" I asked. They both nodded enthusiastically. "You know I'm an organized and orderly person," CL said. "Taking risks is just not my style. But I bet on you in your first match with the guard. I made enough to last me through my old age and still have some to pass on to NL. I thought that would be the last time I wagered, and I breathed a sigh of relief. This time, I took everything I'd made before and wagered it all again. I thought I was about to pass out from betting that much money." "You should have seen him," Goggles laughed. "He was shaking so hard, I thought we'd need to call a medic. He was bound and determined to support you, though, and he made it through." The Centaur Llamas certainly had an interesting relationship with betting. I looked at it as working the odds and making money. They seemed to look at it more like picking a side. The bigger the bet, the more support they were showing for their champion. "I bet on you too," MM chimed in. "I've been saving up so that one day I could travel the realms. I had a decent nest egg and put all of that down on your match." Needless to say, I was shaking almost as much as CL. Both of them chuckled together. I was a poker player, so I knew firsthand just how scary and yet exhilarating and it was to go all in with a big bet. "Wait, are you still a poker player?" My analytical side spoke up. I don't know. It suddenly hit me. Was I still a poker player? I'd come to Louisville for a fresh start and to play with new people. I'd gotten a fresh start all right. Now my whole world was completely different. I realized I'd always had it in the back of my mind that we'd finish up this fight with the rotten mages, and then I'd go back to my real life again. I'd go back to playing on the poker circuit and building my dream of becoming a professional player. Now I wasn't sure that would happen, or that I even wanted it to happen. Okay, this was not the moment to have an identity crisis. There would be plenty of time to figure this out later. Still, I suddenly felt a little shaken. Who was I now? Biddy was right. Managing life's transactions was so much better than just having them show up and smack you across the face. Of course, we still have one more fight to go. Goggles continued his tale, oblivious of my sudden inner turmoil. I gave myself a mental shake and focused on what he was saying. I might not go back to playing poker, but it sounded like I'd already won the jackpot. The odds on Sandy's match were nowhere near as good, but that was to be expected, he said sagely. For starters, most of the mages had just lost a lot of money. That made them pull back a bit and be more cautious on their next round of wagers. Coupled with that was the fact that most of the Centaur winners were letting their money ride on Sandy's fight. So the starting odds on her fight were very skewed at 2-1. This didn't make much sense, of course, as Victor was older and a lot more experienced than she was. Once Victor was introduced, though, the odds started climbing. We went 3-1, then 5-1. I personally thought her odds should be somewhere between 15 and 20-1. According to the odds, the chance of her pulling out a win, or according to the stats, the chance of her pulling out a win was very small. Goggles gave an aggravated sigh. The final odds of the fight were 11-1. That was good, but not as good as I'd hoped. Still, a lot of centaurs had just made a lot of pearls, and this was another multiplier. In your case, you jumped from 120,000 to... He took a deep, dramatic breath. Goggles sure did love his numbers and dramatic pauses. 612,372. He did another happy dance for me. Basically, you're rich. Well, at least in our nation. If you ever got tired of your excited life, and if you ever get tired of your exciting life, you could come and rent out a nice apartment. Prices are reasonable, and you could live comfortably for a very long time. You know, that's not a bad idea, my analytical side spoke up. I'm pretty sure that isn't going to happen, but it's still nice to have a backup plan. For sure, I agreed, although I don't think I would be considered rich in mage circles. Even 600,000 pearls would only buy one basic wand. Fancy wands cost several million pearls, so there has to be mages rich enough to buy them. Those are probably the really rich peeps. True, my analytical side said. Still, you have a shitload of pearls. Let's just enjoy the heck out of that. So I'm hoping you guys are rich too? I looked at the three of them. They all replied with big smiles. I love what I do, Goggles said, but if I wanted to, I could quit today and never have to work again. I have enough to travel, said in wonder, and I'm not talking about traveling with a backpack and a few clothes. I'm talking about traveling in style with enough funds to go and do things when I get there. I'm not going to be able to do that for a while as we leave for training tomorrow. Still, when I'm ready, it's now possible. I never really needed money, CL said simply. I've kept my life simple and my needs are few. The only thing I wanted was to provide for NL after I'm gone. That is certainly taken care of now, so I'm not sure what I'll do with all my newfound wealth. It's a wonderful problem to have, though. It certainly is, I laughed. It's much better than the alternative. So, you're leaving tomorrow? All the supernaturals are, he said. We're headed out as soon as the gathering ends. They are having their big circle thing, and then the Grand Matron is taking all of us to wherever the training is. Normally the mages would be split up from the naturals, but since there are so many of us and we're only half human, we're all going to get to train together. I just realized this is our last night with each other, I said. I was a bit stunned. I'd come to enjoy their company and their friendship. It seemed weird that we were going to be going our separate ways in a few hours. That's right, CL said sadly. I've been trying not to think about it. It's not forever, though. It's just for now. We'll all survive and see each other again. I knew the gathering was coming to a close, and I knew I was headed back home, but it still felt like the last day had snuck up on me. This day had been a whirlwind of emotions. I had alternated between panic, extreme panic, joy, worry, excitement, and now sadness. It felt like I was having emotional whiplash. My thoughts were interrupted as Sandy and the ladies came out of her bedroom. Sandy was just as brown as I was, except her jacket was covered with colorful beads. Not only that, but they had woven colorful ribbons through her hair. The neutral brown really brought out all the vibrant hues, and I thought she looked beautiful. Other than that, she was dressed similar to me, with thigh-high lace-up boots, short shorts, and a tuxedo jacket with tails. I wasn't sure why I was the only one without any beads at all, but I was sure I'd be just fine. We all told her how amazing she looked, and then we got ready to head out. I grabbed my backpack as there was no way Bermuda was going to allow me out of his sight again. M.M. carried me through the fireplace, and we found the captain and a full honor guard on the other side ready to escort us. Once everyone came through, we formed up and headed out. They set an easy pace so we could get used to running in boots and tails. It took a bit to adjust, but the soles of the boots had something that made them naturally springy, and we soon picked up the pace. It felt good to run. I still had too much adrenaline in my system, and I needed to flush it out. I also had too many emotions, and running was a wonderful way to just let them go for now. Once we reached the first main corridor, it became obvious the party had already started. Normally the halls were full of serious centaurs, going to serious places and seriously running. That wasn't the case today. As soon as we came into view, they stopped whatever they were doing and clapped and cheered and hooted like crazy. I think more than a few of them had already had a nip of holiday cheer, if you know what I mean. We continued to merge hallways to bigger crowds and more excitement. It didn't really get wild until we exited the hallway system and came out into the realm of the centaurs. Then the cheering was so loud it felt like a physical force. We were joined by at least another 30 guards, and we needed every one of them. Our pace slowed down a lot as the crowd was so dense. I felt a bit like a rock star as a young female centaur declared her love for me and then fainted. That started a trend, and soon young male and female centaurs were swooning in droves. I couldn't slow down, but I was concerned, as the middle of a crowd was the last place you want to end up on the ground. I said a silent prayer that they were okay and just kept running. The older folks were not to be outdone either. The ladies ripped off their tops and bounced their lovely breasts for me to see. I guess the word got around that I was gay, and soon the men followed suit. I saw all kinds of chests and abs that day. It was a smorgasbord of daddies, bears, otters, swimmers, young, old, skinny, muscular, fat, hairy, smooth, short, and tall. I don't know if I'm open-minded or just a bit of a slut, but I found something to like about all of them. We made it out of the marketplace and headed towards the giant arena. The crowd quadrupled in size, and someone got the bright idea of throwing flowers. Soon we were pelted with tulips, hydrangeas, and sweet-smelling orange flowers that looked a bit like a rose. When they ran out of flowers, they started throwing their clothes. Centaurs only dressed their human half, so it wasn't like they were naked, but they were clearly ready to let it all hang out. I think the captain had had enough at this point, as she told the guard to pick us up, and then she kicked it into gear. The guards in the front started tooting on a bugle to let the centaurs in our path know they needed to get the heck out of the way. It took several more minutes, but the party never stopped, but eventually we made it to the arena and entered the massive structure. The crowd stayed outside, and the buglers stopped playing as we raced down the hallways. Eventually we arrived at a massive archway, and Sandy and I were gently set back on the ground. "We have arrived," the captain stated, giving us a moment to adjust our clothes and make sure we looked our best. I peered between the guards to see what we were getting into. The space inside the archway was beautiful, reminding me of pictures I'd seen of the Sistine Chapel. There were stunning details everywhere of gold and different colored stone, with creative lighting to show it off. The floor was one giant woven rug with earthy patterns and details. There were poles that came out of the floor with a tabletop about halfway up and a light that looked like a spray of flowers on top. It seemed like the perfect place to meet and mingle if you were a centaur. The floor was comfortable to stand on. There were places everywhere to set a drink or a plate of food, and it was just a beautiful setting. The place was also packed with centaurs. It looked like everyone had shown up to say hello. Once we were ready, the captain gave the signal, and the guard formed up into a double line around us. We started walking forward as the guards did their fancy clopping again. We didn't move very far, and I'm pretty sure everybody already knew we were there, but it served to get their attention. The captain called the halt, and everyone slammed the butts of their spears into the ground. This guard certainly knew how to put on a show. Presenting NL, the first mage of Centauro, and her uncle CL, the first natural of Centauro, the captain declared loudly. NL gave me a smile, moved forward gracefully, and took her uncle's arm. Together they trotted up the line of guards and entered through the arch. I could see there was a main path up the middle, leading to what I guessed was an honored place at the head of the hall. NL and CL looked calm and regal, like they did this all the time. I felt a moment of pride for them. They'd come a long way from a dressmaker and a room cleaner. I'm sure it hadn't been easy, but they had learned to adjust quickly. Presenting MM, the second natural of Centauro, and his grandmother GM, a natural of the Llama Centauro Nation. I noticed they were using my nicknames in the presentation instead of their real names. They were probably doing that just for me. I also noticed that they called their land Llama Centauro Nation. I'd just been thinking of it as Centaur Land. Hopefully I hadn't offended them this whole time. I recognized the nervous tingles trying to crawl up my spine. I relaxed and shook it out. There was nothing here to be nervous about. I just had to smile and nod and say thank you. I couldn't mess that up. Presenting Sandy Felton, head of House Louisville, Mage Ambassador of the Deep Earth, Honorary Mage of the Lagarelle, Champion of the Ring, and Defender of the House. Sandy stepped forward, smiling, and walked into the hall. There had been gentle murmurs when the others had been introduced, but the crowd started clapping when Sandy entered. It gained in volume and enthusiasm until the entire place was ringing with applause. I thought they would introduce us together, and I'd walk up the aisle with Sandy. Looks like I was headed up on my own. The nervous jitters were back. Took a deep breath, held it, and let it out. I mentally breathed out all the butterflies at the same time. I could do this. Just smile and nod. Smile and nod. The captain waited until Sandy had made it all the way to the end, and the cheers had died down before turning to me. The buglers blasted out a long blast. Then all the guards stamped the floor in unison and slammed the butts of their spears on the ground 3 times. If we didn't already have everybody's attention, we certainly had it now. Presenting Jason Cole, Mage of House Louisville, Honorary Mage of the Deep Earth, Honorary Mage of the Lagarelle, Champion of the Ring, Defender of the House. He is the Curse Breaker, Shrine Maker, Eradicator of the Wasting. He is Andrado to the entire Llama Centauro Nation. We honor him tonight. Let's bid him welcome. I stepped forward, and the crowd went wild. They stamped and cheered and gave their warbling cries. This was a more refined gathering, so I didn't see any bare breasts and nobody threw their clothes, but it was still incredibly enthusiastic and welcoming. I waved, smiled, and nodded. All my nerves disappeared, and instead I just felt a warm, happy glow. I wasn't a centaur, but these were my peeps. This was going to be a good night. There was a raised platform at the front of the hall with a gruff-looking older centaur standing on it. He waved at me to climb the steps and join him. I would rather have stayed with Sandy and the crew, but I'm sure all the centaurs couldn't see me and smile and nod down there. I climbed the steps and received a long, heartfelt llama kiss. His gray whiskers tickled, and I almost laughed. One of these days, my sensitivity to tickling was going to get me in trouble. But fortunately, it wasn't today. He put his arm around me and turned to the cheering crowd. He waved for them to quiet down, then started speaking in a deep and powerful voice. In honor of our guests, this event tonight will be spoken in English. If you are unsure of the language, please let either the first mage or the first natural know, and they will be happy to translate for you. He gestured to NL and CL. You all know me, so I'll keep this short and to the point, he said. That only happens when you're sober, a cheerful female voice called out. My wife, he said with a laugh, and pointed to someone in the crowd. The crowd laughed with him. And she's not wrong. Everyone laughed again. I relaxed a bit and laughed too. I thought this might be super formal, but instead it felt a bit like I was being toasted. All I needed now was a mug of John's fine ale, and that would complete this evening. Everyone here has a story about how this young man has affected their lives. My own son is a natural, and I'm beyond grateful that the wasting will never darken his door. He pointed to the side, and a young centaur waved at me. I smiled and waved back. I also bet on him today, and I'm proud to say I made enough to keep my wife happy. The crowd laughed. For a few weeks anyway, he added, and the crowd laughed even louder. But tonight is not about me. It's not about any of us individually. It's about us as a nation coming together to show honor where honor is due. A centaur on the ground handed him an old wooden spear. It had a copper tip, and it looked well worn by the touch of many hands. It wasn't magical, so its value was probably symbolic. He smacked the butt of the spear on the platform. I now speak with the voice of the council. He seemed to stand a little taller, and his levity fell away. We had no hope, for there had been none to light the fires of hope for generations. We were not poor, we were not weak, for we are survivors. But there was not the smallest spark of hope for magic in our lifetime. His strong, deep voice rang out, and the place fell silent. The audience and the stunning beauty of the place put me in mind of an ancient church. The silence felt reverend. The high priest was speaking. Then suddenly, we had more than hope. The curse was lifted. More than that, we finally had an explanation. We had the missing piece of what happened to us. More than that, the curse of the wasting was lifted. We now know what caused it and why it is no more. More than that, we now have a shrine. Those who would have wasted away can pass through and receive the gift of a supernatural life. More than that, we now have a fitting memorial for those who have gone before. We have a remembrance of where we came from. We have a promise of where we are going. If all we had was the lifting of the curse, it would be celebration enough. We could have had normal death experiences and gradually built up our pool of supernatural talent. It would have taken generations, many generations, to build our base of power and become a force again. Instead, this young man advocated for us, and the shrine was raised. Now, within one generation, we will catch up. We no longer will be the non-magical race living in a supernatural realm. Instead, we will sit at the table as equal and advocate for rules that will help us. We will make our own pearls, heal our own sick, make our own lights, and create our own charms. It won't happen today, but we are on the path. I invite everyone here that is either a mage or a natural to raise their hand and be counted. My jaw dropped at how many hands I saw. The hall was huge, and there were at least 1,000 centaurs here. So I expected to see only a sprinkle of hands. Instead, it seemed like a third of those present were supes. This many supernaturals all being trained at one time was going to make a huge difference on their society. I'd always thought of being supernatural in terms of power, but looking at it as a nation, they needed money makers. They needed supes that could generate their own pearls and create wealth for their nation. This really was a giant step forward for them as a people. I felt proud and humbled that I had helped them do this. Because of all this, we declare this day that Jason Cole is now a Llama Centauro. He can celebrate as one of us, live as one of us, own property, hold titles, and do all the things that a native-born Llama Centauro can do. I bid you to welcome our new brother. The hall erupted in sound again. It was different than cheering, though, and it took me a few moments to realize the entire hall was introducing themselves to me at the same time. I wasn't sure what to do, so I waved, smiled, and nodded. I even waved and smiled at Sandy. She waved and smiled right back. There must have been a lot of standard, this must have been some sort of standard greeting, because soon all the sound died out. The gruff centaur rapped the old ceremonial spear on the floor again to make sure he had everyone's attention. Because of the profound effect he has had on the Llama Centauro nation, we further declare that he is honorado to us. He is honorado to all of us. This is the highest honor we can extend as individuals. This is the highest honor we can extend as a nation. He turned to face me, put both hands on either side of my face, and Llama kissed me. You are our life brother. He kissed me again. You are our celebrated companion. Kiss. You are our cherished lover. Kiss. You are our exalted warrior. Kiss. Receive this day the mantle of your honor. He stepped back, and two older female centaurs came up on the platform carrying a huge cape of beads. It was an explosion of color: reds, greens, blues, oranges, yellows, turquoise, and every shade in between. They lifted it up over my head, and I realized there was a hole in the middle. So it wasn't just a cape, it was more like a shawl. It was heavy too. The beads weren't just sewn into it like it was flat. Instead, the beads were on strings, and the strings were sewn on. It was almost like I was now covered in a dense fur of beads. It now made sense why my tuxedo jacket didn't have any beads on it at all. NL must have known I was getting this mantle, and any beads on it would have just been covered up. The mantle covered the front of me down to my waist and trailed down the back almost to the floor. It was now officially the most colorful thing I owned, and I loved it. I was also the most beaded person in the place. Once the women had fastened it around me the way they wanted, they left the stage, and Mr. Gruff stepped forward again. He rapped the spear 3 times on the floor to make sure he had everyone's attention. Then he handed it off to someone on the floor. This concludes the will of the council. I will now speak as myself. He seemed to relax a bit and physically transform back into the humorous, friendly person he'd been before. Now the solemn part of the ceremony was over. The light grew brighter. I guess they were making it easier to mingle. I personally thought they'd made the light too bright, as the whole place was shining now. I thought maybe they turned the sound system on too, as I could now hear a background hum. Well, it wasn't a static hum like from a microphone. It was more like a soft choir of voices. Jason has the evening with us, so I'm hoping he gets to meet as many of you as possible. To that end, please keep your remarks brief. Trim out all the flowery words and instead say what is on your heart. Let him know the difference he has made for you, and then move on. There are several food and drink stations in the hall, so enjoy yourself and enjoy your evening tonight." He waved and exited the stage as NL and CL quickly came up with me. The captain set up the guard at the base of the stairs, and a line quickly formed. MM came over to the edge of the platform and handed up a small table. "I'll get you some food," he said, and I waved gratefully. My crew was taking care of me, and I was very grateful for that. I was worried about Sandy, as I didn't want her to get bored, but I saw that she was with GM, and I knew she was fine. GM would keep her well entertained. "Can you see if you can turn the lights down a notch?" I asked NL. "I think they turned them up a bit too high," after the head council guy stopped speaking. "The lighting hasn't changed." NL gave me an odd look. "Really?" I said. She nodded again. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Oh well, I deal with it. The first centaur in line was a petite, well-dressed female of modest years, and she put both hands on either side of my face and kissed me lightly. As soon as our lips touched, I was zapped with static electricity. It wasn't bad, but it seemed a little strange, as I would have thought the static would have happened when she first touched me. Maybe the air was extra dry in this place. It didn't seem off, though, and she hadn't flinched at all. "I'm on the council," she said, "and I deal with commerce. I know you didn't plan this, but you've massively increased the amount of capital we have to work with. As a people, we love to wager, and we usually bet against each other. Millie pearls change hands, but the overall wealth of our nation doesn't increase. This time, we all bet against mages outside of our nation, and we won. We won big. I'm just guesstimating at this point, but you may have caused us to gain more new revenue than we have in the last 3 years combined. Needless to say, I'm very excited to see what we can do with all that." Then she kissed me again, but this time it was deep and passionate. I got zapped again, but this time it didn't really feel like electricity. It felt like something else, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. "And that is for my nephew. He is now a natural." She looked like she wanted to say more, but was keeping it short. I looked at her core. It was stable, but it was a pretty good size. "Have you been through the shrine yet?" I asked. "No, I just haven't had the time," she replied. "You've made life very busy for me." "Well, you need to go," I said. "I would suggest you go tonight, before the Supernaturals leave tomorrow for training. I think you might be going with them." I put my hand where her core was, and a shot of energy jumped out and zapped me. Oh, that must have been what I was feeling when she kissed me. I could still feel the tingle in my fingers, so I sort of flexed my hand and pinged her back. Her eyes became really wide as she stared at me in shock. I felt shocked too. I'd never done anything like that before, and I hadn't even known it was possible. But what I got back was a rush of emotions. There was deep sadness, and yet an iron will to keep going. Tears started flowing, and she held it together for a moment. Then she started bawling, like a deep belly crying. The crazy thing was that I felt all those emotions too, and I sent them back. I let her know she was heard. She was okay. She was a strong and wonderful person. She was seen in this world. It was only about half a minute, but we'd communicated like we'd spent hours together. It was sort of like the images I share with Penny, but a lot more emotional. "What happened?" NL quickly reached out and took the centaur woman's hand to steady her. "I'm not entirely sure," I replied. I realized I had tears running down my face too. "Somehow we magically connected on an emotional level. Make sure she gets with the guard and have her taken to the shrine right away." As NL led her away, I realized I could still feel her. I could feel her core as she left the platform, got with the guard, and cried all the way to the door. Wow, that had been intense. But I quickly shook it off because there was still a very long line of centaurs waiting to see me. The next centaur was a distinguished-looking male who was tall, with shoulder-length, salt and pepper hair. It was very straight, with a slight curl at the end. The way he moved made me think he was always aware of how he looked, and especially how his hair looked. He kissed me gently, but with a lot of limp. Once again, I felt a zap of magic. I am on the council. I also deal with commerce, but I specialize in the housing market. He got a big smile and his face lit up. I bet on your match today. I bet a lot, and I've already put an offer in on an apartment I've been wanting. It has a wonderful view, and it's almost twice the size of the one I have now. I have so many plans for the extra space, and I can't wait to move in. I know this isn't saving lives or anything magical, but you've made a big difference for me, so thank you. It was nice to hear. Not everything needed to be about life or death. I checked out his core, but it was regular sized. I felt it reach for me, so I put my hand near his core. It touched me, and I touched it back. His eyes got really big, and once again I got a rush of emotions. He was a good guy. A little vain, but still a good guy. I sent emotions back, and once again it felt like we'd spent hours having drinks together. When we parted, he felt happy and whole, like he'd had a fun evening with an old friend. As he left, he wobbled a bit, but CL steadied him, and he seemed fine. I turned back to the lion and kissed my next centaur. The next several minutes continued like that. All the centaurs were on the council in some capacity, and I had managed to impact their life or their job in some way. All of them had made money on the fight, and they were pretty excited about what they were going to do with it. Several of them also had relatives or friends that were now supernaturals, and they were looking forward to seeing them change and grow. I was thinking the Centaur Council would be fairly small, like 5 or 10 individuals, but instead it was more like 50. They were all specialized in some way, and it seemed like they worked well together. I continued to touch their cores. Now I'd started it, it just seemed right. I wasn't sure why, but I got a flash of who they were as an individual, and it seemed to turn the simple meet and greet into an experience for them. It was like the touch broke through whatever was holding them back. Some of them had new ideas about their jobs. One said he suddenly knew what he was going to do. He loved her, and he wasn't going to wait a moment longer. I don't know who she was, but he galloped off the stage with love in his eyes. Several of them burst into tears, but it seemed to be the cleansing kind, where you cry yourself out and feel better afterwards. One older lady just passed out. Soon I had guards up on stage with me to help manage the centaurs after the touch, and they created a whole cool-down area for those who'd been emotionally overcome. MM came back with food, for which I was very grateful. For some reason, I was starving again. The food were these little bite-sized wraps. It was like a plantain leaf wrapped around rice and vegetables, and they were delicious. They were also spicy. As Anna Lickett would say, they came correct. And soon, I was sweating. That's where the margaritas came in. It was ice cold and had lots of agave pulp in it. At least, I think that's what it was. Regardless, it was delicious and cooled me down. I don't know what the alcohol content was, but I soon started feeling very happy. The line was moving quickly, so I really didn't have time to stop and eat. MM solved that problem by feeding me as soon as there was a pause. He set up a whole snack and drink area for me on the little table he'd handed up earlier. I told him he was making my night, and I appreciated it so much. NL and CL did a great job of keeping the line moving and interpreting when it was needed. By the time we were 20 centaurs in, we'd hit our stride, and the receiving line was in full production. All the first 50 centaurs in the line were from the council. I guess that made sense, as rank has its privileges after all. At the end of the council members was Mr. Gruff. I was happy to see him, as I hadn't touched his core yet. "Thank you for your kind words earlier," I greeted him. You deserved all of them and so much more, he said sincerely. I wish we could have a week-long celebration, but we've only got one evening, so we must make the most of it. Everyone here has really wanted to have a moment with you, so me flapping my gums was just getting in the way of that. I meant what I said earlier about my son. He is a natural now, and I couldn't be happier for him. He's going to have opportunities I could only dream of. His voice cracked a little. I'm beyond thrilled, truly. His words failed him, so he kissed me again. I touched his core. It was normal size, and he just about collapsed. One of the guards grabbed him and helped him walk off the platform. He was a big centaur, so I thought it might take a couple guards to help him, but he made it. His emotions were just as good as his words. He was a kind man with excellent diplomatic and organizational skills. No wonder he was the head of the council. He was perfect for it. I could have spent a lot longer with him, but I had to move on. The next centaur was a young natural, and he was very excited and nervous about leaving. Everyone else in his family had been through the shrine, and nothing had happened for them, so he'd been totally shocked when he transitioned. Now his whole family was looking for him to make them proud, and it was a little overwhelming. As a natural, he no longer had a core, but I could still feel his magic reach for me, so I touched it back, just like I had for all the other regular centaurs. This time, the emotions were so much clearer and so much more intense. I had no idea it was going to be that powerful, and he shuddered and collapsed. Oh shit, I hadn't meant to do anything like that. CL helped him struggle back to his feet. He swayed for a minute, and I thought he might go down again. Then he got a huge smile on his face. That was awesome, he gasped. Then he staggered off with the help of a guard. I wasn't that much older than him, but he seemed so young and naive. He loved his family, and he was a total mama's boy. He'd worked in their store, and he liked the rhythm of the place and interacting with all the people who stopped by. I'd also received flashes of the girls he was interested in, and he was way less innocent than his parents thought. He also wasn't limiting himself to just one lovely centaur either. And somehow that was all right? I had no idea about dating protocols for centaur llamas, and I wasn't here to judge anyway. The next centaur was middle-aged, and she was a natural also. She wasn't nervous at all. Instead, she told me she felt like she'd hit the jackpot. She was ready to learn and grow and let go of all the things holding her back. I touched her, and once again, I got an overwhelming amount of emotions and images back. I'd heard what she'd said, and I'd been excited for her, but now I understood her in a whole new way. She was a cautious person by nature, and she'd made all the safe choices so far in life. Her heart hadn't been broken, but she hadn't really loved either. Her job was safe, but it was bland and unfulfilling. Most of all, she wanted to have sex, like lots and lots of crazy good nookie. This woman was a volcano ready to explode. I found myself jumping up and down. I was so excited for her, but I was also suddenly horny as hell, and I was still hot and sweating from the food. Wow, what a night. I felt T tugging at my attention, so I took a moment to look inward. Don't worry, he said, we're on it. You should be stabilized soon. Thank you, T, I told him happily. I'm not sure what you're working on, but I'm sure it's wonderful. By the way, you look lovely tonight. He got a confused and slightly concerned look on his face as I zoomed out again. It didn't matter. I felt good. They were helping the lady off the platform when the first natural, who'd already recovered, joined in to help. Their eyes locked, and I could feel the heat pouring off of her, only to be matched by the excitement pouring off of him. Oh boy, sparks were certainly going to fly tonight. I was llama-kissed by the next natural, a gray-haired, pot-bellied little man who put up a brave front, but he was scared to death. I touched him and he just started bawling. I let him know he was okay. He wasn't doing this alone. He had all his centaur companions to lean on and help him through this. He was going to make friends, learn to use his magic, and have a great time. As he was helped out the platform, I turned to see the next centaur and found I was crying too. This was certainly a night of feelings. I made it through 6 more supernatural centaurs before I had to take a break. I was a mess of feelings. I was hopeful, nervous, happy, angry, sad, horny, uncomfortable, and awestruck. It was just too much. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry or just scream and run around in circles. Jason? I realized Penny had been trying to get my attention for a few minutes now. Yes, Penny, what's up? Your magic is sparkling, she said cautiously. I've never seen it sparkle before. It was? I looked, and sure enough, my normal stable matrix was giving off little flashes of light. My new dense spheres were vibrating a bit too. I tasted the magic. It was still mine. I zoomed out and looked at my magic as a whole. Then it became obvious what was going on. I was stuffed full of magic. I had at least 4 or 5 times my normal capacity, and the pressure on my aura was intense. No wonder I was feeling emotional. I took a deep, ragged breath. Penny, did you do this? Did you put all this magic into my system? It didn't seem like something she would do, but I was deep in my feelings, and I was having trouble thinking. This isn't something I've done, she said quickly. Somehow you've generated all this yourself. Well, I don't know where the heck this is coming from. I was starting to feel alarmed, along with all my other feelings. Check it out for me. Is it really my magic? Have I gotten contaminated somehow? She zipped through my aura, running her fingers through my spheres. I think this is all you, she said in wonder. If anything, it's even more soul-saturated than normal. No wonder you are feeling things deeply. Well, I need help, I said tightly. I can't hold this all much longer. If you think it's safe, try taking some of it. Be careful, though. I don't want anything to hurt you. I'll be careful, she promised, and lightly pulled a bit of power. She waited a moment, but she seemed fine, so she pulled a bit more. She still seemed fine. If you're good, then take the extra, I told her, and that is what she did. The release of all that pressure felt wonderful. It sort of felt like I drunk 2 gallons of water and then hadn't noticed my bladder filled to critical levels. Now I just peed all the magic into Penny, and I was so relieved I could cry. That was a terrible analogy, as Penny was not a toilet, but the relief was real, very real. Thank you so much, Penny, I told her as I took several deep breaths and tried to shake the energy out of my system. You fleshy creatures just can't handle pressure, she said sadly. It's a shame, really. I find it very soothing. In some ways, you have it so much better, I assured her. Now, if you don't mind, keep an eye on my magic to make sure I stay at a normal level. Are you okay, Jason? NL asked quietly. We can stop if we need to. Nope, I'm good, I replied. I only have 1 night, and I want to meet everybody here. I'm doing much better now. Just give me 1 more moment, and I'll be ready. She gave my arm a supportive squeeze as I turned my attention inward. What the heck is going on? I asked my analytical side. I'm not sure, old chap, he said, his best British voice. I was happy to hear it, as he only used that voice when he wasn't panicked or highly concerned. I think it started right after Mr. Gruff started speaking and you saw the light, so to speak. That has to be it, I said. I've been with centaurs this whole time, and I've never felt anything like this before. Do you think it's this place? Is it messing with my magic somehow? My analytical side paused and thought. I think it's more than that, he said. This place did do that for you when you first came in. He made you an honorary centaur. Maybe it was more than just symbolic. Maybe you are something special to them now, or they are something special to you. You are a god after all. Holy crap! The pattern clicked into place, and suddenly it all made sense. Somehow he made me their god. Do what? He dropped the British accent. Have you gone bonkers? Think about it, I said. I'm in a beautiful place that makes me feel reverent. I can't be the only one that felt that way. Then the people here tonight have had a lot of good feelings about me. Either they've made a lot of money from a match, or they were new supernaturals, or possibly both. Then he invited all of them in one shot to introduce themselves to me, and then he declared me on Rado to all of them. Wow. I breathed. I think you might be right, he said. I don't think you're their god permanently, but tonight in this setting, you're clearly the focus of everyone's attention, and it must be activating your god stuff somehow. Well, I breathed in wonder. I got god stuff. Yep, he agreed, you got god stuff. Just don't get a big head about it. So should I keep going, I asked. Am I doing the right thing? I'd say keep going, my analytical side weighed in. If your magic is being charged, then their magic is probably being charged too. That can only be a good thing. Plus there's a lot of emotional processing happening tonight. All those supernaturals are leaving tomorrow. So if they are in better shape emotionally, then that's great also. Okay, I said, I'll keep touching them. Appropriately, of course. You had to go and make it dirty, didn't you? He sighed. I just snickered. Time to get back to work. I took a gulp of margarita and then greeted the next centaur. Now I knew what to look for. I could see that not only were my touches affecting the naturals, they were affecting me too. Somehow, sharing memories and emotions like we were was not only giving them breakthroughs, it was also growing my magic somehow. By sharing myself, I was becoming more in the process. Without Penny, I would have had to stop. It would have been too much magic. With her, though, it was just wonderful. I could fully invest myself in each new supernatural and experience who they were as a person without having my power blow up. As for Penny, she was loving it. As we went down the line, she filled up more and more until she was finally more full of magic than she'd ever been before. At that point, I looped in Eggy and started sending magic to him too. He was in a whole different place, so it was a lot harder, but I made it work. He was going to be very happy about this, as he was saving up magic so he could transform into his ultimate form, a vase. That didn't sound that exciting, but since he used to be a sword, but that's what he wanted, so I was happy to help him get there. Finally, Penny called a halt on how much magic she could hold, and started putting the extra magic into the mark of the Lagarel and the mark of the deep earth. It turns out they could only process so much at one time, so they stopped accepting new magic too. By this time, I'd made it through the line. I'd met every new natural and mage of the Centaur Llama Nation. I'd also met all the council and all the important people in the room. I'd connected with each and every one of them, and now they glowed like candles to me. In a weird way, it's like I'd lit up a Christmas tree, one bulb at a time. The centaurs glowed with different colors and intensities, and as I looked around the room, it was just beautiful. I felt deeply connected to just about everyone here. I was still missing a few, though. It was now time for me to touch the centaurs that had been helping me all evening. I called for volunteers, and just about everyone jumped at the chance. I told the guards to form a line, and then one at a time I touched their cores too. I was a little afraid that their experience wouldn't live up to what they'd witnessed all day, but I needn't have worried. They were just as deep and meaningful in experience as everyone else. Now the only centaurs left to touch were my core crew. I was a bit nervous about it for some reason. I was meeting everyone else for the first time, so I didn't have any expectations of who they were or how it would go. With my main centaurs, though, I wanted this to be a wonderful experience. What if they didn't like it? I touched GM's magic first, and our shared experience was everything I thought it would be. She'd lived through her fair share of heartache and pain, and she'd come out the other end with a true appreciation of life. She was all about the journey, not the destination, and becoming a supernatural was just another leg of the journey for her. I was kind of blown away by how emotionally stable she was. I finished my experience in awe of her. When I grew up, I wanted to be just like her. NL went next, and I was shocked at how deep her pain was and just how strong it had made her. Growing up with legs that didn't work correctly had made her different. She'd been an easy target for those who needed someone to pick on. Her parents had been the foundation of her world, and then one day, they were gone. Her uncle had seemed cold and uncaring to her at first, and the only thing that had kept her going was her art. She'd drawn her feelings, both the anger and sadness of what had happened, and also the fantasy of how her life could be. Somewhere in there, she'd gotten strong, both emotionally and mentally. She became her own foundation and her own best cheerleader. Only then could she really open up to her uncle and start forming the close relationship they had today. For several minutes we just laughed and cried and hugged each other. Her story had been told at a deeper level than words, and I'd gotten it. I'd understood her and what she'd gone through. I didn't realize just how powerful empathy could be. She'd spent a lot of time with Sandy, which was to be expected, but I was really glad we'd also gotten to connect so well. NL was a deep, caring person, and I was glad she was in my life. MM was next. His and NL's experience were similar. They'd both lost their parents and gone to live with a relative, but he was lacking NL's creative outlet, and that had made a huge difference. Without a good way of expressing his pain, his depression had gone a lot deeper. She'd also built her strength around her creativity, but he didn't have anything like that to form his own emotional core. Instead, he'd kept busy and worked hard. He just never stopped, working two, sometimes three jobs at a time. He didn't want to relax or spend time on his own, as that's when the darkness caught up with him. Just because he was running from it didn't mean the darkness wasn't there. It shadowed his whole life and relentlessly propelled him forward. He was very productive and helpful to everyone around him, but at some point, he was going to crash. And when that happened, he was going to crash hard. He also had a guy crush on me. It wasn't like he wanted to knock boots or anything, but he found me fascinating. He thought I was confident, attractive, and easy to be with. I was like the warmth to his cold darkness, and he wanted us to snuggle up together under a warm blanket and watch movies together. For everyone else, I touched their magic and accepted whatever emotions we shared. For MM, I wasn't willing to do that. His darkness would eventually eat him alive. I couldn't let that happen. So I kept the touch going. I went deeper. For everyone else, I'd shared who I was, but I hadn't gotten really personal. With him, I showed him my dark side. I showed him I knew what it was like to lose my mother when I was a little boy. I knew what it was like to be abandoned by my father. I knew what it was like to fend for myself and try and find my way in a hostile world. I'd also found the power of acceptance. I shared with him what it was like to have my face caved in by a golem and my body broken by a vicious mage. At one of the darkest and most painful times in my life, Annabeth and Tyler had shared their message of acceptance. Annabeth said, "Whatever you resist persists, so stop resisting. Feel what you need to feel and accept the situation however it is." Tyler had said it differently. "Find your new normal. Accept the way things are, then plan how to make it better from there." I don't know if I can do that," he projected. "I'm so tired of running, but I can't stop." "I'm here with you," I moted back. "We'll face it together." He stopped and we turned to face the darkness. In this weird, emotional, shared space we were in, the memories seemed like a storm. The clouds were so dense they seemed to boil, and jagged lightning flashed in the rain. He trembled like a scared little kid. If this had been real life, he probably would have thrown up and run away. I wrapped myself around him, letting him know he was supported. He was not alone. The storm got closer, and it was savagely intense. I started to wonder if I was doing the right thing. I wasn't a trained therapist. Maybe the storm was bigger than we could handle. Sure, I'd learned the power of acceptance, but this seemed bigger than that. Who was I to think that I could just show up, tell him something so simple, and have it solve something as deep and powerful as losing your parents? I was in over my head, and if MM got hurt because of my stupidity, I'd never forgive myself. Our communication was wide open, so MM felt everything I was feeling. I turned to let him know we shouldn't do this, and instead, he started supporting me. This is something I've needed to do for a long time, and having you here really helps. Knowing you felt what I'm feeling makes all the difference in the world. I'm facing my storm today. I hadn't known how to before, but you've given me a way through. Stay with me, hold me. I want to do this together. I gave him acceptance and love. If this was what he wanted, then I wasn't going anywhere. The storm rolled over us. The cold rain lashed down so hard it stung. The lightning flashed and the thunder rocked our world. Memories and emotions of deep loss rolled over us, and for the first time, MM faced the unthinkable. His parents were gone. Really gone. He was not alone, but the gaping hole of grief hurt so bad. He sobbed, great heaving gasps of anguish, and I cried with him. Rain and tears poured down our faces, and as his emotional wound started to flush clean. Somewhere in the middle of the storm, loss turned to anger, and we screamed at the sky. Darker emotions of blame and shame wanted to stick around, but we kept coming back to acceptance. That led us back to loss, and then to anger again. We cycled over and over as the storm raged, and finally, somewhere in here, the sky became a little lighter. The lightning and thunder passed us by. The rain became gentle, almost cleansing. Finally it stopped, and we stood there, watching the storm blow off in the distance. We stood there for a long time, wrung out from the intensity of it all, both enjoying a moment of peace. It's gone, he finally said in wonder. Not forever, I replied. It will be back, but it won't be as strong. You've been through the worst of it and survived. Now I'm not afraid of it anymore, he said softly. I smiled and hugged him tight. You hear that? He yelled at the storm. I'm not afraid of you. He shook his fist at the storm, and then he started running. He ran in relief. He ran because he felt so much lighter. We both ran, and it was a celebration of life. Eventually, we both collapsed on the ground together. We were worn out, but in a good way. For a while, we just existed, finding joy in the silence. Finally, I turned back to him. We have to go back. I know, he said. Then he hugged me tight. I love you. The emotion was powerful, and it hit me in a totally different way. This wasn't love like I had for Tyler, and it wasn't love like I'd had for my mom and my sister. This was love like a close friend. I was starting to experience it with Annabeth, John, and Sandy, but I'd never felt it so clearly before, or so powerfully. I love you too, I told him. Whatever happened from here, wherever life took us, we had this moment together. It was something I'd never forget. We stayed there for a few more minutes, then just naturally came back to the real world. I blinked and looked around, but it seemed like almost no time had passed. We'd spent many hours in the storm, and so much had gotten worked out, but here it had only been a couple minutes. Wow. MM hugged me tight and then ran over to GM. He pulled her to the side, and as they started talking, I could see her magic light up. I saw relief and happiness for MM spilling out of her. MM was going to be okay. I touched the whole room, and everyone was lit up now and connected to me, except for CL. He was my first centaur friend and the reason I was here today. This time I put both hands on either side of his face and kissed him. My emotional channels were wide open, and I let him know all the love and respect and hope that I had for him. As we touched, I got his story too. There was everything I'd expected about losing his brother and having NL come and live with him. What I hadn't expected was how being so organized and detailed had shaped his life. Even when he was little, he had felt when things weren't right. It could have been a blessing, but instead it was a curse, as everything bothered him. The way food landed on the plate bothered him. The color of the room bothered him. Items being out of order bothered him. Messy rooms bothered him. It was a lot to handle, and nothing seemed right. Over time, he learned that most people didn't feel the way he did, and most people did not appreciate being told what they were doing wrong. He learned how to manage his observations and had found a job cleaning for the house. It suited his talents perfectly, as he could fix anything bothering him. His rooms weren't done quickly, but they were immaculate when he was finished. Now he was putting up a brave front, but he was scared. He was leaving his job that suited him so well, leaving behind something he excelled at, and heading into the unknown. The sad truth was that where he was headed was probably not a place he was going to be good at. Training was going to be messy. Training was going to be awkward. Training was going to bother him a lot. I kept my touch going, and we both shared deeply again. I told him about what Biddy had said about adventure. The key is to mix the familiar with the new. He was going with NL, ML, MM, and GM, and the other centaurs he knew. He could create a space for himself that was just right, and then accept the chaos in all the other parts of his life. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew he could do it. He wasn't a little kid anymore. He was an adult with years of experience relating to others and finding his way in life. He was going to find his way again, and because of his example, others were going to find their way too. CL just needed a moment of being vulnerable, of being heard, and he was already finding his strength. I knew time in this weird emotional space passed differently, so I was happy to just spend time with him. He cared deeply and found the oddest thing